All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I know everybody's got a busy day. I want to welcome you all to our April Spotlight meeting. Thank you for taking your time and joining us today. One quick reminder for those that were on earlier, we had our evaluation, the QR code and the link up. We'll have it at the end as well. So if folks wouldn't mind making sure that you let us know what you think of these updates, these spotlights, as well as the resources we've developed. As you can see, we've got a little different format today for our agenda. We just have one speaker, but it's a speaker that have been really anticipating hearing from. It's Dr. Barb Peterson. She's kind of known as the veterinarian who was instrumental in cracking the code or the mystery behind the bird flu in dairy cows. Just from trying to make arrangements for that, she's extremely busy and in high demand, both with her practice and for folks that want to get her, be able to learn from her experience. So, and I'm trying to be very mindful of her time because when you see, she is on farm right now, but I am going to go ahead and turn this over to her. And thank you, Dr. Peterson, for giving us some time out of your day.
Great. Thank you, Tina. Thanks so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. So,
Okay. Okay, perfect. Well, for just everybody's on the same page. I am on farm and parked in a commodities area right now. So good morning or good afternoon, mid early day from outside of Plainview, Texas. And yes, I was in kind of ground zero a year ago with other veterinarians, and definitely not no mystery solving ever happens alone. But I am just going to share some feedback on what happened and some One Health perspectives, and also share just kind of what we learned along the way. So let me share my screen here really quick so I can show those pictures I was talking about. Okay, so oops, share this. Oops, I'm sorry. Can you see this okay?
yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Any questions you have? I don't think we have a Q&A function. I think we just have a chat function. So feel free, put any questions you have in the chat. I welcome any questions, discussion, dialogue. And again, this is just an opportunity to share kind of a year in review, what has happened and what we've learned. So yes, last year this time we had March Madness 2024, the Animal Health edition, not necessarily the basketball edition. So I am just going to share from the farm perspective what that very briefly what that looked like here and the questions we asked and the answers that we ultimately got. Some One Health in action, and yes, there's opportunities right here for, we're kind of in the center, all of us, of the opportunity for the human and the animal and the environment. So just sharing what kind of that means here and what it means big picture. And then of course there's a lot, sadly, there's a lot we don't know. Like we are constantly learning more and more and more. I if you would have asked me a year ago about avian influenza, I would have definitely phoned a friend, which is what I did initially anyway, because I don't work with poultry. I don't follow avian influenza closely, except to understand the impact that it has on turkeys and on egg-laying birds. So unfortunately for us, this was very new, and so I want to share what we've learned along the way. So I put this disclaimer up just because I am going to show photos that some people might find upsetting that are of sick and dying animals, including birds, cats, sick cattle, and sick human beings. So please don't, I'm not upset if you leave or close your computer. It's fine. I just wanted to share this because there are some images that are might upset some people. So that's not the intention, it's just to learn. So the first calls that I got, just to kind of give a real quick history on how kind of this evolved, myself and other veterinarians are getting these calls from dairy owners and we have we have pretty good sized dairies here, right? So we have a well-built team of people that is always checking cows for their health, right? We're checking for health and reproductive status and activity and rumination and all these things. And so they're calling and saying, hey, we have these cows and they should be, mid lactation, late lactation, even early lactation, and they're dropping their milk like they're going dry. So these are just three images of cows that should have normally, right, have really full, beautiful udders. And they look like, yeah, they're drying off, right? Milk production is dropping. The udder starts to kind of almost look a little bit flat, right? And you can see we've been marking these cows with a variety of methods, including chalk, flagging tape, marking the udder, just to denote, hey, something's not right. And the next thing that, in addition to cows not making a lot of milk, they are also making really, really abnormal milk. Some of them, right? So you can see that the picture on the left, of course, is showing some milk that almost has like a cheesy yellow consistency, definitely abnormal texture, right? And same thing on the right here, definitely again, milk that kind of looks like the consistency of Elmer's glue. And I showed these to students recently, and they said, "Is that the cream from the Cadbury egg?" Which no, no, it's not. This is the secretion that we were getting from these girls' udders, right? So unfortunately, right, as these girls' milk production dropped, they essentially are secreting what ends up being more like, looks like colostrum, looks like dry cow milk right before they dry off. So okay, we got mastitis, we got milk drop, we have cows that are febrile. And of course, the normal rectal temp on the cow is 101, 102 and a half, maybe 103 in the afternoon if it's summertime and she's outside and she has a dark hide and she's outside. Um, we're seeing temps, 104.2, 105.3 Fahrenheit, 106. And the thought initially was the thermometer must be broken. So let's get another thermometer because that can't be right. That can't be real. So we did. We got other thermometers and continued to check temperatures on these girls. And yeah, 104.3 and higher, unfortunately, last late fall in California, the entire state of California at this point has been impacted essentially. And a colleague of mine, Dr. Brian Welly, was gracious and shared these photos when they were in the middle of this and said, "Hey, I have fevers of like 107 and 108." So just really, really high fevers. There's a group called Smacks Tech, and this is not an advertisement for them. They are just one of the companies that has a bolus technology. So they have this bolus and it sits in the reticulum. So it sits in the stomach, one of the stomachs, right? And it's constantly monitoring temperature, feed intake, water intake, things like that. And the normal reticulum temperature is 103. It's a little bit warmer, right, than the rectal temp. They saw fevers in the reticulum of up to almost 110. And some of those fevers persisted for more than 72 hours. So yeah, these girls are extremely febrile temporarily. And the other thing is that they are not eating well, right? So they're not eating well, they're not drinking a lot of water. They have this really not well digested manure. It's sticky, it's weird. It has a lot of fiber. We of course have a huge list of myself and other veterinarians and folks on farm are making this giant list, right? What the heck is going on? Make a list, check it twice. And I thought this is fascinating. I have been trying to play a little bit with artificial intelligence, and this is just, so if you typed in cows that are low milk production, have a fever, and aren't eating, right? It gives you kind of a list, like a laundry list, right? Thinking that, oh, maybe she's fresher, maybe it's milk fever, maybe it's a metabolic disorder, low calcium, maybe she has mastitis or metritis, but please consult your veterinarian for diagnosis and treatment. So that's where all of us stepped in and just really began sampling cows, everything you can imagine, right? Every bacteria, every virus, every potential feed ingredient, right? Because we did not know what was causing these girls to have all these clinical symptoms. And probably one of the ones that was the most fascinating to me, I work with a wonderful Hispanic culture here. And a lot of the folks I work with are originally from either Mexico or Guatemala. And one of the folks I worked with, his name's Juan Carlos, and he pulled me aside, and this is prior to the diagnosis. And he said, "Hey, these cows look like in Mexico, when we see tick infested cattle, If you open and look at sometimes in the ears, but mostly in the vulvar vestibule of the vagina, you can appreciate here maybe there's some like off color vessels, right? So some vessels are kind of sticking out. And the other thing, it looks like almost that the vessels are leaking serum. So it almost kind of has like a yellowish hue. So that's vasculitis, right? And so when they ask about la garrapata, right, they're asking about the tick, and we start checking for ticks, and we don't have a lot of ticks here, but that was on the list. The other thing to note is we had cows that two things. The picture on the left is just a picture again of vasculitis of the nares, right? Of the nose is super, super red on the inside. And there's kind of a classic, this is kind of a classic virus appearance, textbook, IBR type appearance, red nose. So I have a client, he's like, I have all these cows with red noses to the point they look like they're gonna bleed. And then on the right here, I am palpating the spine and the pelvis of a cow that has subcutaneous emphysema. So this normally we can find this sometimes post calving. So if a cow has had a uterine infection, right, then she might have released air, gas in the abdomen, and it doesn't belong there and it's trying to get out. And the other way we see this sometimes is with pneumonia. So if a portion of the lung ruptures, releases that air into the body cavity, that also can look like that. And then finally, yeah, unfortunately, cows that are just very, very, the descriptive term that a lot of people on farm would use is just depressed, right? They look depressed, they sad, they're off feed, they are dehydrated, they are salivating, they have a lot of nasal discharge, their ears are down, eyes sunken. Because yes, as these girls, just like us, now that we know what this is, like when you have the flu, you just don't feel good, right? You don't want to go to the milking parlor, you don't want to eat, you just want to rest. So that is essentially how we handled and supported these cows. Now, I realize I'm showing some pictures that are very different, but also helped to diagnose this challenge. Prior to the cows getting sick, we had sick birds that were entering the milking parlor in the free stalls. Like some of them, unfortunately, had like fallen down in the feed areas, and all different types of birds, blackbirds, crows, grackles, sparrows, different types of birds where they didn't belong. The county east of us had avian influenza in wild birds like 2 weeks before the diagnosis was made. Then unfortunately, we had avian influenza diagnosed in these birds, in the county west of that original county. And then in that same county, we had cats. So farm cats were either completely missing. So a colleague of mine, Dr. Tim Dickerson, he doesn't like cats at all. He's like, normally those cats come and they urinate on my vet truck, and they didn't come. And where are all the cats? And the cats all of a sudden are missing. And then I'm getting reports, and he's getting reports, and others are getting reports that the cats are dying. And so when we finally got a chance to see some of these cats, they are neurologic, they're not grooming themselves, they are blind, they are stumbling, they are have looked like they have respiratory signs, right? They have a lot of nasal discharge, they have discharge coming from their eyes. And so initially we thought, gosh, it's again back to this whole idea about feed. Are they rabid? So it was really helpful, but also really a really challenging time when all of this was happening at once, because this graph illustrates just how many cows got sick at once. Because when all the cows were exposed to the virus at one time, we normally are treating less than 1%. In fact, it's usually less than a half a percent, right, of all the cows that we care for are requiring some type of supportive care, right? We would call it here a hospital pen, right? A place you're going to get care that's separate from the rest of the herd. And normally, we're not treating and supporting more than 1% of the herd at any given time. But you can see here at the end of March, this is a client I work with. I realize that's a big number. It's 11,000 cows. It's 5 separate parlors. It's four different locations. But yeah, the one day that we decided we are going to treat all these animals just with oral fluids, just with supportive care. That was it. And we rocket shipped up to 700 cows. And that day, all of us, right, have been drenching cows and IVing cows and moving cows to locations where they could get care. And we're just like, we can't, it totally maxes out your normal system that you have to care for animals when you have that many sick animals at once that need attention. And of course, the abnormal milk too, right? That the milk, those girls have to be separated. So you're constantly moving animals. So this is just an image. This is not meant to promote doing this at all. This is just an image of what we did at the time. This is just a tank here on the right that contains water and electrolytes, and we are providing oral fluids via a pump. So they're essentially getting oral fluids delivered to them. They were getting 8 gallons per day of extra fluids. So yeah, this is One Health in action, right? So the findings of the positives, right? So we had the wild birds, cats. The cats tested positive. Unfortunately, their brains and their lungs and their eyes are very affected. And cats, I didn't know this. Cats are very, very sensitive to avian influenza. That has been documented in Europe previously, prior to being documented in the United States. And then, yeah, the finding of the milk and the mammary gland, right, the udder tissue, kind of brought it all together, because those were all submissions that were made to the diagnostic lab all around the same time. And I'll never forget the milk. The diagnostician who helped, there's two of them, Dr. Alexis Thompson here in Texas, that in the lab in Canyon, so just down the road from me, and Dr. Drew Magstad at Iowa State. And I had sent samples to both just because at that point the Texas lab had done a great job. They had run so many samples for us. And I had called Dr. Drew and I said, hey, I'm going to send you some also. I have deceased cats and milk. I'm going to send you both to you. They both were ruling out rabies. And he had reached to rabies negative sooner just because the Texas stuff had to go to College Station. And he calls me and he's like, who took the milk samples, Barb? And I said, I did. And he goes, is there any way they could have been contaminated? And I said, contaminated with what? And he's like, well, avian influenza. And I was like, I don't think so. I was, had cleaned the cows prior to taking the samples. So run it again. He ran it as a pool. So he ran them as individuals. No, they're all positive. So then the next day he sends them to the National Vet Lab and they confirm it. So the important thing here to remember, think about, I'm probably Scooby-Doo in this mystery machine, right? There's so many of us working this case. There's veterinarians, there's concerned herds people, there's owners. So many people are working this case. The challenging thing for us, bringing it back to One Health, is there were human beings on farms that were sick. They had either flu-like symptoms, which we were in the time of the year where you easily could have had the flu. It's coming off of winter, coming into spring. We had folks that looked like this gentleman right here. So this is from this area. Um, Really, really, really severe conjunctivitis, to the point that it looked like not just a little pink eye, looked like somebody had gotten punched in both eyes, and both eyes are bleeding excessively internally. We now know that humans have receptors in their eyes for this, but at the time that this happened, there were just multiple species that were sick, right? Birds, cats, cows, and people. And so you think about this from a One Health perspective, it's not just veterinarians, it's all of us that are working together and supporting agriculture, that are thinking about, humans that work with animals, the animals themselves, and the environment that we work in. And you think about One Health, to me, also means, your physical well-being, your mental well-being, and your emotional well-being, because this was an extremely trying time for everyone. I have a client who, he called me at 7 days into his infection, before we had the diagnosis, and he said, is this ever going to stop? And it's the unknown, it's fear, right? That's I'm saying, the weekend we got the diagnosis, I just thought this is going to be something terrible. And thankfully it is not. As it is not, there's still a lot to learn, right? But your mind sometimes thinks about the worst possible outcome in that moment. And just as a reminder, bringing it to One Health again, that there have been now, this is the human cases of avian influenza H5N1 in the States. This is from, I took this on Monday, excuse me, yesterday. Just so there's been 70 cases, and those potential sources of infection, right, have been either dairy farms, dairy cattle, poultry, whether that's through working with poultry or depopulating poultry, other animals, or unknown exposure. And so just a reminder, all the folks that I understand here have recovered. They had either flu-like symptoms, and the majority had conjunctivitis. But just as a reminder, this we are susceptible to this pathogen. And so I always think about, well, I really care and I love the people that I work with. How do I protect them? Right? How do I protect everybody that's caring for cows, calves, milkers? How do I protect those folks? That's what I think about every morning when I go to work. So just as a reminder on food safety, right? Pasteurization of milk is effective. I don't want that. I don't want people to think that you shouldn't be drinking pasteurized milk. That has been demonstrated by the FDA. So yeah, the FDA tested pasteurized milk, cheese, butter, ice cream, and have done continuous testing just to confirm, yes, that there is no live virus, right, in these finished products. But unfortunately, there is risk with raw milk, right? That there can be, because for whatever reason, right, the mammary gland is very, very efficient at cranking out this virus. So the milk can have a very high level of virus in it, especially sadly before the cows even become clinically sick. Dr. Magstedt and others now have demonstrated that for up to 2 weeks prior to cows being clinically sick, they are shedding a lot of virus. So that's just something to keep on our radars if you have folks that are raw milk drinkers or are selling raw milk. Is just, we have to keep that on our radars. And then beef testing, right? The USDA FSIS does routine slaughterhouse inspections no matter what. They had done some selective sampling just to look at, I think it was kidney, liver, and muscle tissue. And I believe there was one diaphragm, it was one muscle tissue sample that had been positive, and that animal was oh my gosh, I'm thinking of the wrong word. Discarded is the right word. Was not put into the food supply. And then just a reminder on cooking temps, right? So if you like to eat a steak medium rare, right? There potentially could be risk there, but if you cook to 120, you have essentially substantial inactivation. 145 for cuts like steaks and rest at 3 minutes, or 160 Fahrenheit for ground beef will kill the virus. That's also on the website for USDA, and all the FDA stuff is on their website. And the other thing, unfortunately, I think that's part of this One Health picture is, as many of us have pets, dogs and cats and all kinds of wonderful pets, there is risk with raw diets, right? There have been my understanding is raw turkey and raw chicken, even if it's freeze dried, raw diets, that there have been cats that have died as a result of consuming this raw food. So just as a reminder that that also has been investigated and continues to be supported and investigated, that they're just understanding that there is risk there. So for herds, I'm hoping I'm visiting with folks in locations where there are herds that have not been infected. Seems like a lot of the Western states have been impacted already. So my suggestion is, I'm thinking about this not only as a veterinarian, but as an animal owner, as a cattle owner. What I would love to know is, if I'm purchasing animals, I would love to know their status, right? Ideally, you would want to know the status of multiple potentially different challenges, right? Other viruses like BVD, you'd like to know the status. If those cows are lactating, you'd like to know if they have other contagious mastitis pathogens, right? Like Mycoplasma or Staph aureus. So if I think about that just from an owner perspective, it's so important to know. There's a herd here in Texas that middle of the year last year had, my understanding is, had animals that were recovered, and they were commingled with animals that were naive, right? So animals that had never seen this virus before, and the naive animals became sick. So in most states, like Texas as an example, you can move cattle in the state of Texas and not test for this virus. but I would not recommend that, only because if you it's on the buyer, right, to just understand the status, because there is risk there, as demonstrated unfortunately by examples like that and what has happened. I would highly recommend, again, like if you are going to introduce animals, have a location, physical location where you can quarantine them for 2 to 3 weeks minimum. And that for us here has been a challenge. Not everyone has an area that is a quarantine area, or they have pens, but those pens are immediately adjacent to, resident cattle, right? Restricting traffic and visitors on and off your dairy, I think, is critical, just because you want to understand who is visiting and you want to try to minimize, even for us here, it's truly a safety thing when it comes down to it, about folks driving around, walking around. We just want to make sure that we understand who's visiting, and we just try to minimize people from driving around the dairy, because they'll drive through a feed area, then they might drive by a manure area, and then they might drive by your calves, and it's just, you just that want to try to minimize that and keep those areas as clean as you can. And then yes, just understanding that there is risk to humans for this, right? So if you, it's been demonstrated, I believe, in Michigan and Colorado, that folks that shared housing, that worked in poultry and or dairy operations, that there was potentially risk there. You know, if I don't own any chickens currently, but if I did, I would want to think about that, right? I wouldn't want to accidentally expose them. Or if I worked, obviously I work at multiple different dairies and feed yards and calf raisers, so I just am cognizant about trying to stay clean between all of those. And yeah, it's the simplest stuff, right? Sometimes, like wearing gloves and washing your hands prior to eating or drinking, or using tobacco, and protecting your face and your eyes. Because as those images demonstrate of the conjunctivitis, it's pretty severe. It's pretty painful, right? Nobody wants to have inflammation of their eyes like that. And then yes, if you are on farm, I'm thinking about dairy, but this is true for any livestock location. If you can have clothing and work boots that stay on the dairy, and then yes, hoping for the and expecting the best, and truly planning for the worst. And I don't mean that as a pessimist, I mean that as a realist. Because with all the peridomestic species and all the potential modes of transmission, there unfortunately is a lot of things we don't understand yet on how this is moving around. So I would think about now, okay, how can I quarantine new arrivals? And if I am going to introduce any animals, getting them tested. And then yes, I love, okay, so I think I want to clarify something. I love biosecurity. I think what I just talked about are examples of biosecurity. And what I don't want to have people do is spend time and money and resources and effort on things that at the end of the day might make us feel better, but I'm not sure specifically for this virus if it has an impact. And I want to give an example. So this is a picture of France in the 1930s, right? And they're trying to fortify themselves and prevent invasion from Germany from the Nazis, right? And so you can see on the lower right hand corner, they make this really strong ground level, like on the ground fortification, right? So they have barriers, and they have basically this whole line that's going to prevent entry of Germany, right? So think about bunkers and think about things, ground forces, right? And what they didn't plan, and they spent a lot of money on this. And what they didn't plan for, unfortunately, is Germany went up to Belgium and entered on the Belgium side, right, into France. And so again, what I also, I can give the analogy of, I don't put up a chain link fence to try to keep mosquitoes out. So I just think we have to think about things that are practical and things that actually at the end of the day will be extremely effective. And there's initially here, we tried, and a lot of states really went above and beyond things, even like spraying tires on vehicles, right? That kind of stuff. And I'm not saying don't do that, but it can give us a false sense of security that we are doing something. And the reality is, we just need to understand the animals, one, that come in and out of our location. And two, we need to understand if our neighbors unfortunately have been impacted, because that ultimately puts us at risk as well. So again, yes, unfortunately, we have a lot of critters that are at risk at this point. The initial transmission is the hypothesis is that it was a wild bird to cow somewhere in this area. All the felines, domestic poultry, wild birds, of course, a lot of small mammals here have been tested right now, including mice and skunks and raccoons and possums. And, we had people here that trapped all kinds of animals for us for testing. And Parks and Wildlife continues to test wild animals. Pigs, there was a case, I believe it was in Oregon, of a backyard pig that was with commingled poultry. Milk cows, sea lions, dolphins, and unfortunately there's more. If you go onto the website, unfortunately, there are so many different species that are impacted by this virus. And then I want to highlight really quickly, being sensitive on time here, it's 11:35 my time. Okay. So I just want to share real quick some on-farm data, some research that's been completed. Some of it's been completed at the National Vet Labs in Ames. And then a quick study that was completed in Ohio, so an on-farm study. So I just want to share these real quick, and then I'll open it up for questions. So just as a reminder, this is work that has been published in the last year. So the udder, as we now understand, has a lot of receptors for this virus and it can replicate in the udder. And then the infection does cause what we would call necrotizing mastitis. So think about death of the cells, some death of cells inside the udder, and fibrosis is unfortunately just a fancy way of saying scar tissue, right? So these are some of the cellular changes that can happen when this virus is inoculated into the udder. We had an interesting finding here that we have some of our herds, my clients have cows that have collars, right? So they're monitoring activity and rumination and eating behaviors. And if dry cows were located on the same location, so again, these are cows that are not milking, right? They're pregnant, but they're on the same location, same premise. Those collars gave us an indication that those rumination minutes also dropped the same times that the cows dropped. So we thought, and some of the feed intakes dropped and some of them dropped slightly. So we hypothesized that the cows that were dry, not milking, were also exposed at the same time. And I'm going to show you some Ohio data that shows that they did develop antibody titers. So this is kind of an interesting experiment. So think about calves. These calves, I believe, I'm gonna double check this, but I think that they were 2 months old, and they were basically exposed to the virus via their mouth and nose in a controlled setting to try to demonstrate are young stock susceptible to this virus, right? So animals that aren't making milk. So they developed, increased nasal secretions. They were coughing. They had some mild pneumonia, and then they also did develop antibodies in their blood pretty quickly. In fact, it was a couple of days, and then they had serum antibodies. And this is the other one. These were Holstein heifers that were a year old. And again, in a controlled setting, they essentially put a mask on their face and wanted to have them inhale this virus, right? Just to see if this virus was inhaled, what happened. So there was some mild pneumonia as a result. They did elect to euthanize these animals to open them up and see what was going on the inside. And they had some damage to their lung tissue. And again, it did create an antibody response in their bloodstream. Then the only other thing to note is that this last piece of information is, imagine once we have samples from processed tissue. So imagine we have done a post-mortem exam, right? We've looked at an animal after it's died, and we take these nice little tiny slices and we look at them under a microscope. Well, those get saved for a long time. They get saved sometimes for 7 to 10 years. So what researchers did is say, okay, there's a stain that we can use on what we call fixed tissue, these tissues on these little microscope slides. There's a stain that we can use to go back and look at these cells to see if they have receptors. So what they found after doing staining some of these fixed tissue slides is that the lungs and the brains of cows also have receptors to the virus. And something I find so fascinating is that the lungs and brains on these fixed samples were from both beef and dairy breeds. So just something to put into the universe and just say, hey, it's, you know, there is a potential, right, that this is impacting the bovine as a species. I referred to this earlier. This is kind of a really busy graph. This is courtesy of Dr. Magstat. This is from National Milk Producers website. And what I'd love to draw your attention to, so on the x-axis on the bottom, you have the days before or after the herd became clinical. So this is a dairy in Texas that milked 2,500 cows, and they happen to be saving bulk tanks. So they save, a lot of us here, we save bulk tank milk for like quality purposes, fat and protein, somatic cell counts, that kind of stuff, right? So they had this bank essentially of bulk tank milk by day, and they gave permission for the lab to test it. And so day zero, there in the middle, represents the first day that they really had an increase in clinically sick cows. And this dairy doesn't use any monitoring. So this would just be, visual detection of clinical signs like I showed earlier. The thing I think that's really important to point out here is that blue line, light blue line on the top left. You've got on the y-axis the PCR test values. And remember, on a PCR, the lower the number, the more viral particles, the more pieces of Legos, as I like to describe it as, the more Lego pieces are present, right, of the virus. So this approximately 16 days before the cows got sick, there was an increase in that virus detection via PCR, again, in the milk. So again, that is the genetic way to look for presence of virus is PCR. So thinking again back to my North Star of protecting people is that if we understand when this is happening, that's the window I would love for people to wear clear goggles and when they handle cows. And if they're willing to cover their nose and mouth, that would be the time frame that I think would be appropriate. It's that time. That is the most, what we would describe as like the most viremic time. The most virus is being shed and produced. And actually, once the cows are clinically sick, as their body responds and makes antibodies, the viral shedding, it goes down. So this is on the National Milk Producers website. I welcome y'all to look at it, and I can share it also if you need a copy of it. So finally, I'm going to wrap up with this is great. This is work that was just published. This is a preprint coming from Ohio, coming from our friends at Cornell, and it demonstrates basically what happens economically. This is a 4,000 cow, essentially a 4,000 cow dairy in Ohio. They had received animals from Texas that were well when they were shipped, and 2 weeks later, once they got to Ohio, they got sick. So their clinical phase was March 19th to April 11th of last year. They had an incidence of disease that was about 20%. And remember, think about that graph I showed y'all with the hospital cows over time. This is very, very, very challenging times on the farm because this all happens within a span of a week and a half to 2 weeks. They had 770 sick cows, 777 sick cows out of almost 4,000 cows. 60 days, so 2 months post clinical outbreak, the milk loss in the clinical cows was down 2,000 pounds from expected production. These cows that were clinical, so out of these 777, if they were clinical, they were 6 times more likely to die, whether that was die naturally or die by euthanasia. They also had a almost more than 3.5 times risk increased for being removed. And when we say removed, what that means is she got sick, she recovered, and she was sent to beef, right? Because if she is either not producing milk or she has recovered, but she is not fit for our herd for as a milk cow, then she is going to enter her career as a beef cow. So those girls have an increased risk for being removed from the herd. So the economic losses just from milk production, the mortality from death loss, right, and early herd removal was estimated at almost $1,000 per clinical cow. So that then puts their economic figure at $750,000 impact. So again, this is nothing compared to what the poultry industry is facing, but just to put it in perspective, there's a pretty big impact here. And we also have impacts on reproduction, and obviously on labor and emotional, physical impacts, right, on everyone that is working through this. So it has a pretty big cost. And then, yeah, like I think I touched on this earlier, but what did the immune response look like in these girls? Again, clinical phase was that same timeline. And then blood samples were collected in June. So end of June, they collected a bunch of blood samples on these girls just to see what did the response look like for antibodies. So they had 570 out of the 637 cows with serum antibodies, right? So positive, your immune system, right? You think about your immune system in two ways. One, it's your natural barriers, which is your skin, your tears, right? Those kind of things. And the second one is the learned mechanisms, right? Where your body sees that weird Lego piece and says, well, I don't like that Lego piece. I'm gonna bind that Lego piece with my own Lego piece and get rid of it, right? So that's your body's response. So it's interesting to know of those girls that they sampled, 80 almost 84% of them were not clinically sick, right? So there was essentially an immune response across the herd, regardless of whether you were sick or you were relatively normal. And then the dry cows, this is a thing I think is very interesting, is 40% of their dry cows, 17 out of 42, did have a serum antibody response. And it's important to note the dry cows were housed on site at this dairy at the time that cows were sick. The milk cows were sick. So yeah, just to wrap up, this I think has been a very challenging time, was a challenging time, is a challenging time for poultry industries, for the dairy industry, um, and even for folks that are owning pets that have had pets at risk for this. I'm thinking about cats specifically, but there's been a ton of fear, right? We're in a post COVID-19 era, and there are challenges associated with that. Every state can choose how they have responded individually, and every state has responded differently. The federal response, unfortunately, has been a little bit disjointed for a number of reasons, mostly because they I think initially didn't really have a playbook for this. And then yeah, each individual agency has their own goal, right? FDA is all about the milk, and USDA is about slaughter, right? And the different agencies that would oversee vaccines, and CDC is about human health, and it's all these different agencies that are really needing to collaborate to work together on this. And initially, there was a lot of disjointed response. And I think all of us could agree when we have very specific One Health goals when we think about on farm, right? I think that those are all really similar, but the challenges then come with fear, right? Folks are afraid to test or be tested or to be identified, or all these types of things. So it created, unfortunately, some failures in communication that I want to personally, I want to learn from, because we're facing now challenges across multiple segments, right? Whether it's about trade, whether it's about immigration, whether pick something, right? We're facing so many challenges. And the other thing is, I just really think we cannot continue this depopulation of poultry. We've got to think about how we house animals here in the States, and how much risk we assume when we house them in the numbers that we do. And the same is true for dairy. We have to think about that there's risk when we have larger operations. And yes, the stages of grief, right? What you expected versus the reality is that everyone is in some different place all the time. And the only person I can control is myself. And I might imagine, I think I know where someone else is, but every day just make the commitment, like I am going to, when I know more, I can do better, right? I'm going to do the best I can with what I know right now. And then I'm going to commit to learning more every day. So yes, very stressful times, right? This tag here on the left says that, in Spanish, this cow died from the virus. And obviously milk dumping. Milk dumping is highly emotional, understandably, highly, highly emotional. And yes, folks definitely here were at times just out of fear, right? Like no trespassing. Please don't come onto my farm, that kind of thing. And of course the biosecurity sign as well. So this is just, I don't know how many veterinarians we have on the call, but this is our North Star. This is our oath. This is our compass. And we take it really seriously, that we're going to commit to support animal health and public health and advancing medical knowledge. So just as a reminder, I'm grateful to be on here today on behalf of veterinarian colleagues, because this is why we do what we do. So really quickly, I think we should think about, what are we thinking about with girls that are healthy? Again, think about those girls in Ohio that were healthy, that responded to the virus, that never got clinical. So why didn't those girls get sick, right? What is common about those cows? And what's unpredictable, right? We want to spend all this energy and time thinking about the virus and, learn about the virus, and we need to. But we also need to think about immune systems and populations as well, in every population, not just humans. And yeah, we've got to continue to work to protect human and animal health, because the citizen is our consumer, and everyone depends on, again, back to the One Health, right? Healthy cows, healthy humans, supportive environments. So unfortunately, yes, this has been a dress rehearsal in my book for foreign animal disease. And I really, really hope we can keep learning from this and be prepared for whatever comes next. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pause and stop sharing and open this for questions.
Okay, I'm just gonna go down. We've had some questions. If you've got questions, just if you want to put them in the chat or just speak up, but I will read through some of the questions. The first one that I've got is, what are your protocols or the steps that you take when moving from farm to farm?
Yeah, so me personally, and this has kind of, I think, been a standard always, is clean boots, clean coveralls. Some of the folks I work with now, I have designated things that stay on the farm. And then of course with my vehicle we have now designated parking areas that we park in. And then we travel around the dairy. Today is a little bit of an exception, but normally I'm in a little Kubota side by side when I'm on farm. So I'm not driving around the dairy. So that's just the simple stuff, right? Just stay clean and use clean items everywhere you go.
Okay, right. Um, Another question we had was, are there any indications that it is in sheep, goats, and wild deer?
Good question. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know if there's been testing done. And if there's anyone on here that does know that, please feel free to pipe up and say yes, no.
Okay. The next one, has any work been done to understand the impact on biodiversity, songbirds, and other endangered species?
That is probably a great question for the wildlife folks. Again, I don't know if there's any wildlife folks on here. I don't know personally.
Good. Right. Then we also have a question about, can you share more about your comment that we cannot continue to depopulate poultry?
Oh, sure. I think about it in a couple ways, different ways, right? I mostly think about what it's like to have to go through and be the people that are physically doing it. Is sometimes when I think about this, I work backwards and think, okay, how do we get to this point? What can we do? Because I do think that poultry producers do an excellent job of sometimes they have shower in, shower out facilities, they have air filtration, they have controlled traffic, they have controlled visitors. And I think, one of the challenges potentially has been this idea about not fully understanding all the mechanisms that this virus can spread, and the concern on either our humans or others could be passively carrying it somehow. We don't know that. Is it transmitted via aerosolization or droplet, right? That as well. And I am concerned because I think that I'm not saying I don't want animals to suffer. I'm not saying that at all. I just think about, we kind of have gotten in this rhythm now that, the term I think that gets used is stamping it out as a means to stop it. And also because the mortality is so high, that is why the election is made to euthanize poultry. But I just think about it as we, have impacted our production here. And there's definitely challenges. My understanding is there's challenges about trade if we were to think about a tool in the toolbox like vaccination, as just as an example. So I just think like we've got other tools in our toolbox that we maybe haven't had the chance to explore fully for a variety of reasons. So I guess I just always think about it from the outcome and work backwards when I make that statement.
Okay. And then also, and we talked about it a little bit on the phone the other day, and we've had some questions that have come up in other meetings about your thoughts on whether we're seeing cows reinfected or is it a kind of a one and done?
Yeah, a good question. So initially, some of the locations that are now seeing infections may or may not have tested initially, right? There initially was concerns about testing and especially prior to the federal order, which reminder, the federal order only covers milk cows that cross state lines. So that if cows move in the state, they don't have to be tested. But there have been reports. I chatted with the Idaho state veterinarian a couple weeks ago. He's had some, but the animals weren't necessarily clinical. And then I believe I'm going to get this wrong. So I think was Nevada or Arizona, and even California now as well has reported some uptick. And again, I don't know. California would potentially have had previous surveillance just because of how they chose to do surveillance in the state. So it's a great question. We here locally we are not seeing any evidence of this. But that's a great question. I don't know fully. And again, if there's anyone on here that does, please pipe up.
Right. And then there was a question. Do we think the virus spread has subsided in dairy cows? Is the east, which is less cases, still vulnerable?
So I don't know. So having lived and practiced and dairied in the Midwest and out west, I know some but little about kind of how concentrated some of the East Coast dairy locations are. My concern is that not just because of the bird migration and the flyways, but also just because of the other mammals that we now understand could be carrying this virus. I do think there's risk. I don't know how to quantify that, but I do unfortunately do think that there's risk for folks that have not been impacted. As far as current infections, the challenge right now is the national milk testing program, the NMTS. If you search that term, then you'll find what I'm speaking about, which is essentially like what we would call the silo program and bulk tank program, and some states are at the farm level testing. It's great, but it's very reflective. So it's almost like I'm looking in my rearview mirror to see where it has been. And ideally, we'd love to know more of like the windshield view, right? Like we're having some more real-time testing. My ask actually has been with the USDA and the FDA to have some sort of other more rapid testing available just to get you a status. And the challenges there have been, testing capabilities and reporting of results and things like that. So I think more to come on that.
All right. And we did on the sheep and goat, we've got a response that no reports of sheep in the US, but did have a case in the UK. Young goats had neuroscience from H5 in one mixed farm in Minnesota associated with poultry. So,
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bigot Whittle. I appreciate that. I had not thought about, I know that had happened and I wasn't thinking about it.
yeah. Um, are there any other questions? I think we've got, I thought we had a question. We had somebody that unmuted. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Peterson. I have been very much looking forward to this presentation and was not disappointed. I appreciate your time and I know you are busy. We've got somebody with their hand raised. So, um,
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're very, very welcome. It's great to chat with everyone. And if there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat or send them to Tina. I don't know if there's a repository of questions afterwards, but if there's other questions, feel free.
Dr. Bickett Whittle, did you have a question or I saw you
No, that
flash.
was just an applause emoji. So thanks,
Okay, all
Barb.
right. I just
You're
thought
welcome.
I saw it briefly and I wasn't sure whether it was a question or a comment, but thank you.
Yes, thank you so very much.
Yeah, this was definitely, we had a little bit of time or a little bit of issues trying to get you on our schedule, but it was definitely well worth the wait. So thank you. And we will let you go. I'm trying to be very cognizant of your time because I know you've got, got your pressing matters waiting outside your, your vehicle. So,
Okay. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm gonna go look at some heifers, but I hope y'all have a good rest of your day.
okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I am going to give you a little bit of an update. I'm going to share my um, slides again. Just give you a little bit of an update on what we as the Excite, the H5N1 group has done. For those of you who are new or have not visited our website, we have made a few changes just to make it a little easier to find what you're looking for. So if you want to revisit our website and see what we've got there. Again, we are working on getting all of our resources in Spanish as well. So most of the one-page flyers have now have a Spanish version. Again, at the last meeting, we mentioned that we do have banners, the retractable, kind of the full-size banners that are available. We'll be taking requests for those up to the 25th of this month. So, so if you go to the website, there is a link there that you can request your banner. But this is just a kind of what the banner looks like. And it's also got the QR code that will take them to the website as well. Some things that are coming soon that are now being in their final review stages are we've got some social media posts. There's two here just for folks that that make use of social media that want to try to get some information out, maybe to the general public on bird flu. We did kind of shift a little bit. We've been trying very hard to make sure that we use the H5N1, but the general public just knows it all as bird flu. So we did make that put that in those social media posts just so that everybody knows what we're talking about. We've also, based on some of the evaluations, we had requests for information for those that are exhibitors at dairy shows, especially youth shows, and recommendations for dairy show organizers. So that that should be up on the website, those two, very quickly. But we've got one for each group. We also, and it goes along with Dr. Peterson's discussion on, on farm visits. Jason Hartshoe at our last meeting talked about what to do when visiting dairy. So we've got his checklist. We're working on that right now, so it should be up hopefully by sometime next week. And then we also had some requests for some poultry information, so that will be coming. It'll be mostly geared towards backyard and youth poultry exhibits. The focus of this group is on the H5N1 in dairy, but we are, our main goal is just to educate. So there is a need that some of you all expressed for wanting information for poultry. So we have included that on our website. And again, all of, if we would like for all of you to, to visit our website, we'd also like you to let us know what you think are these evaluations, as all of us that are involved in extension know how important evaluations are. So we just encourage you to fill out those evaluations. It helps us get a glimpse of what's needed. It also helps us to tell the story of what extension is doing in regards to H5N1. And I know we've got a couple of our team members on here. Jackie, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention again, pay attention to, if you will, the weekly Excite newsletter items. It has a lot of the direct links to the resources as they're coming out. And at this website, we're hopeful that as these resources come out, the best way to get them out to the world is through you all. We don't have a national link of everyone that's doing this work. So please, please do help us push those things out and then report back to us how they've been useful or any new items. Everything that's been created has been based on your input and your feedback and what people want and need to know. So thank you for the great work that you're doing, and we'd love to partner as we continue in the future. Thank you.
Okay, and we did have some discussion that folks are getting a bounce back message when they try to follow the link. So I think Melanie.
Yeah,
is
I think Melanie's
addressing-
working on that. I tried that. It didn't bounce for me. So I'm just wondering how many
It just
people.
worked.
It did. Okay.
All right, perfect. Thank you all very much for that. So it's, and we will, since a lot of us have been talking, that is a nice, fairly nice day out. It's not too hot, not too cold. So we will be, again, respectful of your time, and we appreciate everybody that that joins us for these monthly spotlights. And again, please, if there's some topics that you would like more information on, or a suggested speaker, just reach out to us. Let us know. We want these spotlights these are for you. So we want to cater them to your needs. So just let us know of resources that you need or speakers that you'd like to hear from. With that, I will thank you all again for joining us, and have a good week.
Take care, everyone.